The City Council Committee on Ordinances, Licenses, and Legal Affairs, co-posted with the Committee of the Whole, will meet in person on Thursday, May 4th, 2023 at 7:00 p.m. for the purpose of a presentation from CFO Anna Freedman, sharing information relative to water and sewer rates with a focus on potential mitigation planning and the ways the city might address financially as well. This meeting will be held in the City Council Chambers, 93 Washington Street, Salem, Mass., second floor. Individuals may listen, view, or participate remotely in the meeting via a remote participation platform called Zoom through either of the following ways. Please click the link found in the agenda, password 202668, or telephone 888-475-4499 or 877-853-5257. The webinar ID is 889-2726-7485. Every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so on matters not requiring a public hearing, we will post on the City of Salem's website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. The City Council Committee on Ordinances, Licenses, and Legal Affairs, co-posted with the Committee of the Whole, met in Council Chambers on May 4th, 2023 at 7:00 p.m. for the purpose of discussing a presentation from CFO Anna Freedman, sharing information relative to water and sewer rates. Let's see. The notice of this hearing was posted on April 28th, 2023. Okay. Audio's on. Are you getting it? Meg, can you hear us? Okay. All right. So the notice of the meeting was posted on April 28th, 2023 at 9:49 a.m. Okay, so with us tonight from the Ordinances, Licenses, and Legal Affairs Committee is all members, and with us from the Committee of the Whole is all members. We have Councilor Stott and Councilor Wassenfeld joining us remotely. We also have with us Anna Freedman, the aforementioned CFO, Dave Knowlton from the Engineering Department, and we have a special guest tonight who will do the presentation. Let's see. Toby Fetter, right? Is that correct? Okay. All right. So Anna, do you want to come up and start us off?
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Thank you to the committee for having us tonight for this presentation. This process, just to remind everyone about how we got to this point, this process was really kicked off a year ago from now during our FY23 budget development. We noticed that on the horizon there were several water sewer capital infrastructure projects on the horizon, and that it likely warranted a deeper dive into how the rate structure could potentially accommodate such projects, what that would look like, and just to do a deeper dive on how our rate structure is currently comprised, and to determine whether it might be appropriate for the city to look at structuring that differently. And so the council approved some funding early last year for us to go forward with a study. And so we put out an RFP early in FY23, and the firm Raptelis, Toby Fetter is here representing that firm tonight to do the presentation. They responded, and we've been working with them for the past 6 months or so, doing an in-depth analysis and working through the goals for the study and coming up with a scenario that we are seeking to present to all of you tonight, get your questions about before we finalize those recommendations to come to council as part of the FY24 budget planning process. And so they prepared Toby has prepared a PowerPoint presentation that will walk through not only the scenario that we're currently evaluating, but also the scenarios that we looked at that aren't necessarily ones that we would likely foresee putting forward as a recommendation this year, but there may be some things to consider for future years. And we wanted to just go through what the implications for these scenarios might be, and also wanted to talk through what's driving the scenario that is in the PowerPoint in front of you tonight in terms of the capital plans that are involved and other assumptions, to confirm that the goals that we sort of set for the exercise and for the potential recommendation would be consistent with goals that the council would like to see as well. So I think without further ado, I think I'll kick it over to Toby Fetter from Raptellus, who will walk through the slides, and we can certainly take questions at any time.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Just a warning, you need to speak into the
Lean
microphone
in.
so that everyone at home can.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and just start up my screen share. Okay, so thank you for having me. My name is Toby Fetter. I'm a senior manager with Raptellus. We're a nationwide financial consulting firm for municipalities on many things, one of which is water and sewer rates and the financial management of public utilities. So that said, just first off, just sort of give you an idea of what it is exactly that we do with a rate study. Obviously, a rate study is, in the end, it's about setting rates, but it's actually more than that. So the big thing is it's about ensuring the long-term financial stability of the sewer and water funds within the city. It's about analyzing what the impacts of potential changes are and making sure that we basically plan for everything that the city has on its plate as far as capital improvements. Because as you'll see, as we look at some of the financial projections for the water and sewer utilities, capital investment here in the city is going to be a significant driver on rates. So generally speaking, just to set the table, current industry trends and really challenges for the public water and sewer utilities. Water rates around the country in recent years are rising, generally speaking, at around 5% a year. That's probably going to be increasing with what we see happening with inflation. Sewer rates, very similar, going up by 6% or so a year. And really the combined impacts of inflation, aging infrastructure, and declining consumption are they're really taking a toll on all utilities nationwide. So this is not an isolated trend here in Salem. So inflation, I don't need to go on much about, but I will make a quick statement about aging infrastructure. In here in the Northeast, it's not something that is uncommon whatsoever for utilities to be looking at a installed asset base that is getting older. And okay, need it. Oh, okay. It's not unusual for a city here in the Northeast, given the age of the utility systems here in the Northeast, to need to be reinvesting. Indeed, that's something that Salem is planning for, and we've included in our assessment. So the financial planning process, basically, if you think of it as sort of a bucket, really the three things that go into it. The first is really the revenues. We want to have an understanding of how the utility generates its revenues long term, and that's your operating revenues, your non-operating revenues, and really trying to understand what the trends are in growth or decline in build usage. We overlay onto that really the expenses, and when we talk about expenses from a utility standpoint, we're talking about the operation and maintenance costs, salaries, electricity, vehicles, things along those lines. We add into that just long-term budgetary inflation. Here in Salem, you have two regional providers for the actual provision of drinking water and the treatment and disposal of sewage. And those are the Salem Beverly Water Supply Board and the South Essex Sanitary District. And then on top of that, you also have capital investments, and that's really the aging infrastructure piece. And that comes in two pieces. Really there is a component of it is, money that you just spend out of your annual budget when you need smaller things replaced. But the fact of the matter is when you have large projects to complete or long-term large capital investments, those are by most municipalities handled through the issuance of debt. I'm going to be talking about how we've built that into the plan so that you actually don't have a revenue requirement for the utilities that bounces around. And then finally, on top of those two things, we really take a look at what the city's financial policies are. We want to understand and plan for making sure that we're meeting your reserve targets, We want to make sure that we aren't violating any debt management covenants that you have in the city. And we have reviewed those as part of this process. And then also, we take a look at what are colloquially known as interfund transfers, and we'll talk a bit more about how those come into play here in Salem as we look at some of the later slides.
Thank you. Just a very quick question. You noted the general increasing rates about 5% per year for water, 6% for sewer. And then you noted that it's not uncommon in the Northeast for there to be aging infrastructure, which needs replacement. Do those increasing trends hold regionally, or do those trends tend to be higher because of the aging infrastructure? What are we actually looking at here versus nationwide?
So we'll get into what exactly we're looking at here in Salem a little bit later, but indeed in the Northeast, because the infrastructure tends to be older than in much of the rest of the country, and investment is further along, the reinvestment, the replacement of 100-year-old pipes, not that this is a case in Salem, but certainly in other communities here in the greater Boston area, things like separating out storm sewers from drainage sewers. That's something that's very common. And so I would say, generally speaking, here in the Northeast, the trends have been a little bit higher. The numbers that I covered there in the first slide were really nationwide slides. Okay, so just some quick background, just to make sure everyone's on the same page. So here in Salem, your utilities, while we think of them as two separate utilities, from a legal standpoint, they're actually bundled as a single enterprise fund, which means really wherever the rate revenue comes from, it's applied against the combined expenses of the utilities. And we can talk about whether or not that's appropriate long-term. It's just that is a de facto sort of condition that we have here. And it's played out in a way that we'll be talking about more. Obviously, the water utility here in the city's portion of it is really after the water is treated by the Beverly Salem regional provider. But it's the operation of the distribution system and all of the associated infrastructure like pumping stations, hydrants, valving, everything like that. You pay the Salem Beverly regional provider based on a percentage of flow share and their budget. And so we have a projection for what we think their budget is likely to do in the coming years built into the model. And then you bill out your customers based on a combination that we'll talk a little bit more about later. But it's a mix of what would nominally be called a fixed charge as well as billed usage, which is the standard way of doing things. Now, on the sewer utility, very similarly, you basically own and operate everything that's internal to the city, and you basically pay the regional provider to accept the wastewater from the city, treat it to basically federally required standards, and discharge it. And then you bill customers for the sewer usage based upon modified water readings. And when I say adjusted in this case, what I'm talking about is the city of Salem allows customers to install a secondary meter called a deduct meter, such that water for things like irrigation or other uses that do not end up going to the sewer do not end up getting billed as sewer usage. Okay. So one thing I did want to point out based on a couple of conversations I've had here is due to the regional nature, one of the sort of idiosyncrasies of communities like Salem, where you're buying your water and sewer larger service from a regional provider, the growth in billed consumption and the growth of customers actually provides a marginally downward pressure on rates, because the cost of providing that service, if you bring in an extra, say, 100 accounts over the course of the year, the cost of providing that service to those 100 folks is basically anomalous to the operating here in the city, but the increase in bill from your regional provider is a smaller percentage, because that's your flow share percentage on your regional providers, which is what would increase with new accounts, goes up a smaller percentage than the actual billed usage that you have here in the city. And so the growth of accounts, the growth in new customer base actually does help provide some downward pressure. here because of the economics. There are certainly locations, and I can name many of them, where, for example, let's say Salem was a community elsewhere and you had your own water treatment plant and new growth was causing you to have to build new treatment plants or expand capacity of pumping stations and things along those lines, where growth would drive costs. Because of the structure of the utilities here in Salem, that's not really the way that it plays out from a financial standpoint. So, and then one other thing that I did want to point out here, and this is done different ways in different communities, so it's important to recognize the stormwater and drainage costs here in Salem are all recouped basically through the sewer usage charge, which is to say that the cost of dealing with stormwater and drains is built into the sewer budget. And so in effect, when we're talking about increasingly stringent regulatory requirements on stormwater, right now, under the existing set of rates and rate structures that you have, all of those costs are basically paid for proportionally based on how much water use each customer has. So just I wanted to point that out, because that is most definitely not consistent across all communities here in the Northeast. Okay, so onto the existing rate structure. So you have on the water utility, you basically have a combination of a fixed charge with some, and then a water usage charge. Now your fixed charge is actually what's in the city here known as a minimum charge. And it's a charge that's assessed on either a monthly or quarterly basis based on the customer. And it includes some usage, a small amount of usage. Now, the vast majority of your customers actually use more than that. So the actual impact of the minimum charge is negligible in many ways, simply because once you go beyond a certain amount of usage, the minimum charge does not apply to you. And that amount is actually a fairly small amount of water. And then on the water side, basically assuming you're above the amount that's included in the minimum charge, it goes to just flat rates, which is you're paying basically on $1 per, in this city, 100 cubic feet, but an easier way for most people to think of this as a cost per gallon. So it's very similar to buying apple juice from that respect. Now on the sewer side, it's a little bit different. You do not have the minimum charge. First off, you have a series of rate structures that are flat volumetric rates, similar to the apple juice comment I just made on water, but that's only for residential customers. For sewer customers, you actually have a multi-tier rate, which charges one rate from the first gallon and then a higher rate once you get beyond 25,000 gallons. And on both of these, one thing I would additionally note is you have a residential rate for each of these, and then also a commercial rate that's higher than the residential rate. Okay, so this sort of is intended to illustrate one of the things that's going on here in Salem. So the two green bars here, water is on the left and sewer is on the right. These basically they show the revenue streams that come from the billings that we just talked about, that are generated by the rate structures we just discussed. Now, what you'll notice is on top of the green on the left-hand side for water, there's a red bar. And what that is that's effectively a revenue transfer from the sewer side. Now, as you recall, I mentioned that the two utilities here in the city are a single enterprise fund. And so in effect, what you have is you have the sewer is generating historically more revenue than it needs to operate. And the water is generating less revenue than it would need to operate as a standalone utility. And so in effect, what you've had is you've had a revenue transfer from the sewer side over to the water side. And in the past year or so, that's been about $1.5 million a year, just to put it into context. It's a significant chunk of the overall cost of water services provided by sewer-related revenues. So, does anyone have any questions on that? Always worry that since I deal with this stuff regularly, I don't describe it very well. So, okay. Now, this is sort of this is the capital investment challenge that the city's going to face. What you'll see in each of these, and on the top is water, on the bottom is sewer. This is basically the charts on the right-hand side of the sheet there represent the cash flows in each given fiscal cycle that are going to be associated with the capital investment that the city needs to do. And on the water side, I want to be very specific about this because both of your regional providers also have CIPs that we've attempted to include in our assessment, but obviously the city of Salem doesn't control the regional providers. And so we're never exactly sure what will happen, but we have a very good, I think, estimation of what should occur with both the Salem Beverly Water Supply and South Essex over the course of the next 5 years. But these numbers here are specifically only in Salem. They have nothing to do with the regional providers. So in Salem, on the water side, we expect you to have over the next 10 years around $44.5 million in investment. And that's all money going out the door, either on the chart, either as cash going out the door, and that's the light blue-green at the bottom of the stacked bars. And then the top darker green bars are really the cash flow associated with the issuance of debt. So that doesn't, the bars for the dark green don't show you the amount of debt that's going to be issued. What they show you is the amount of payment you're going to owe on that issued debt in each fiscal cycle.
Thank you, Chair Marcilla, through you to Toby. Could you just touch briefly on why there's such a dramatic change after fiscal 2028?
After fiscal 28. So what you'll notice there is there's a fairly large drop off in the amount of cash finance CIP in 2028. And so that's why you see, if these were stacked with the dark green bars at the bottom, what you would see is a slight increase between those 2 years in the amount of debt service, because we envision additional debt being issued between those years. But due to the financing plans of the water and sewer departments, the amount of capital that's expected to be spent on a cash basis just goes down substantially between those 2 years. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure.
Sorry. I understand that's the numerical reason, but I don't know what is the reason for that difference. So that's just like a mathematical
Sure.
math
Well, it has to do,
different drop off.
that's correct, or fairly, it's basically an escalated number. What you'll see if we were to have a copy of the expected CIP, the capital improvement plan for water, is that you would see that we were financing things, expecting to finance projects on a cash basis up through more than just a base level up through that fiscal 28 period. And then really in fiscal 29, we're expecting to drop back down to a lower level where we're carrying, I believe, a fixed amount that we're escalating. We're assuming that we're going to be doing, I think it's around $250,000 annually in current dollars. And then we escalate that through the end of the 10 years. So.
Thank you. I think one way to explain it as well is that we are trying to leverage an appropriate amount from the retained earnings that exist for the fund in a way that doesn't totally eliminate those, but would take pressure off of the debt service needs. And what's happening is just that it reaches sort of a pressure point where you can't use as much retained earnings as you otherwise might be able to use because of the way the revenues are materializing and what the pressures are for the debt service. So it makes it harder to use, it makes it harder to assume that we will have the same available cash from retained earnings to put toward projects. And so it becomes a little bit more debt heavy. That could be pivoted if our, if revenues perform higher as we go along, that could be toggled a little bit. But I think from conservative budgeting principles, I believe those are the assumptions that we made in the model.
Yes, Anna is completely correct on that. None of this locks you in stone for the next decade. If things perform better, you can cash finance more, and many utilities attempt to operate that way. So if you have the reserves, then by all means, there's no reason to issue debt. It's just that the scale of the capital investment that's envisioned right now is beyond the ability of the utility to finance it purely with debt, or even mostly with, or pardon me, purely with cash, or even mostly with cash.
Go ahead, Anna.
I meant to add one more thing. I think it's also that year on the schedule of when the debt would be issued for the projects that are envisioned for the upcoming couple years in the 5-year capital plan. I think that year as well, more debt service payments just roll on because of the nature of the scale of those projects as well. So it's a combination of the retained earnings piece, maybe not being as available. Hopefully it will be based on how things turn out, but and then that additional debt rolling on because of there's some larger projects that the water sewer department is projecting are needed actually in FY24 and over the next couple of years.
Councilor McLean, did you have a question?
Yes, I did. So I'm just trying to make sure I'm understanding this correctly, because this looks like real numbers, not just a percentage. And so it's not simply the share of cost that is being serviced by debt that's increasing, it's the actual cash available that's decreasing. And my understanding is that our funds for these are in healthy shape, right? So I'm not expecting the funds to sort of suddenly take a precipitous decline that would result in a decline of the amount of retained earnings available. So is it simply that there is existing debt obligation that we're going to be committing that cash to? I still don't really understand why the available cash is taking sort of a $500,000 drop at that location.
Okay, thank you, Counselor. I want to be very clear. Maybe I've misstated something. These bars, we'll see the full costs for the utilities on an annual basis in a moment. These costs are purely the annual cash flows, the outgoing cash in new capital spending and new debt service associated with capital in those fiscal cycles. So the fact, I mean, part of it is honestly, we want to try and level out the bumps, so to speak, and that's why you see both of these are inclining across the board. Not on a perfect line, obviously, but as Anna correctly pointed out, the numbers that we are looking at here, fiscal 29 is 5 years out, and depending on how things develop, and honestly, you never know what might happen in the next 5 years. Maybe the need for some of these projects could go away to the availability of grant funding. Maybe there will be other projects that need to be done instead of what's currently envisioned in the CIP. Right now, this is basically a cash flow that is associated with our best estimate of what the needs are for investment in the water and sewer systems. So.
Thank you.
And then switching down to the bottom graph, which is obviously very similar. Again, we're talking about a significant amount of investment, about $40.5 million over the next 10 years. That includes, as I indicated earlier, where you fund your drainage work out of your sewer utility. That $40 million includes over $15.5 million in drainage related improvements, but specifically does not include the Canal Street project, just to be clear. So that project's not in these numbers right now.
Anna?
And just looking at David, don't know if there's anything we should add to this, but for the purposes of modeling this out, the Canal Street project, which is a several tens of millions of dollar project, that there are some existing authorizations from several years ago, but I do believe it would require further authorizations because that project is still underway and being developed. And I would look to David to fill in any gaps that or questions around that. We thought it prudent to not necessarily fold that into these rate projections at this time, because that still has some potential matters to resolve. But what we have included in here are the typical annual capital investments that come before council every year. And then there are a couple other capital projects, particularly the drainage project that Toby was just mentioning, that totals around $14 million. that is looking like it's something that is timely going into FY '24. And so we have included that, and that would be something that we are anticipating is likely to be on the capital plan, but we're still finalizing all of those numbers. But just wanted to point out that the Canal Street project, which has a larger price tag than the 14 million probably. I think to date, we've authorized $25 million for that. That is not in here. So if that project that's finalized, that would be on top of that would be outside of this modeling, and we would need to then apply a fresh look at that, how that would. But we felt because it's a bit of an outlier with the other projects that are typically authorized, that it seemed like it could throw off this analysis since it's not quite ready to be further authorized.
Anna, do you have, or are you going to be presenting tonight kind of a multi-year look ahead at what these capital projects are that you're discussing?
We have a list because we haven't finalized the capital plan recommendation for FY '24. I don't have it quite ready for sort of full consumption, but I have that we could talk through the types of projects that we are looking at. And so if there is any feedback on those, that would be helpful because we are working to actually finalize the recommendations tomorrow morning. But so we could talk about the types of projects, and I think David could help us with any details on those if there are questions about specific projects.
Okay, and that's more than just the current budget that you're working on, but even.
Yeah,
past years?
we've mapped out and put in placeholders, assuming, okay, if this project needs to come on in FY '27, here's what it would look like, assuming that we're not able to get, certain types of grants, or if we can't get on the SRF program, which does principal forgiveness and has low interest payments. So we've sort of mapped out, like, if everything kind of comes to fruition as being projected by the water sewer department, what would that look like for the fund, and what would the fund need to be raising in revenue in order to accommodate that, to ensure those projects can.
Councilor Presnowski?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This question is probably to David more than anything else. David, we have the new projects that are coming on, including the Bertini's property that we're talking about now, and also the South Campus, which is going to eventually become some kind of a project. The sewerage for those, and maybe even for the new train station that they're proposing on Canal Street, is that going to be going through that deteriorated pipeline on Willow Avenue? Is that?
No, that goes down, all Canal Street is fed by its own system. There's a trunk sewer that runs down Canal Street, actually two of them, two large pipes, so it will continue going that way. And if there are needs for capacity, as those projects develop more, then that would be included in the development cost of the improvements.
Thank you.
Or the improvements.
Councilor Cohen?
Thank you, Chair Marcillo. Just a question for the group. Will there be an appropriate time tonight to talk about the Canal Street project, or will that be a subsequent meeting? So is there a place in this? So I don't want to jump into it now if there's a place that we're going to do.
So I think, I believe the last slide talks about the analysis around capital projects and kind of the process we're going through right now to determine appropriately what fits in the model and what does not fit in the model. So maybe it's at the end of the last slide. I think that might be.
Okay. Okay to proceed? Very well. Okay, so moving on to really the water and sewer projections. This slide basically projects for water what we expect the overall in stacked bar format, the aggregate costs of O&M and Salem Beverly and debt service, and in red the cash capital, and in yellow new debt service for the envisioned CIP. And those are shown in comparison to the black dashed line there, which is your existing revenue stream from your water billing, from your existing rates. Now, what you'll notice there is even in fiscal 23, we're expecting about $1.5 million short. And that directly addresses what I referred to earlier about the revenue shift from money that is raised via the sewer rates, which is entirely legal and fine since we have a combined enterprise fund. But as you can see, really the important takeaway on this slide is compared to what our existing rates will raise in revenues in comparison to what we expect the water utility to actually be costing over the course of the next year, the existing water rates are insufficient to cover those costs. That's really the important takeaway.
Council Dominguez?
Thank you, Chair Marcelo. Just quickly, can you please, in simple language, because we're doing this presentation for us, but also for the general public. Can you please specify what is the CIP cost mean? And also, in simple language, also, can you tell to us what is the cost right now at this point per gallons that the residents of Salem are paying right now, based on the information that you give us, as simple you can?
When you say what the residents paying, I guess, so right now, the bills to the city residents generate something to the tune of $5.9 to $6 million annually in revenues associated with water bills and the ancillary revenues. The remainder of the existing budget this year will be covered by excess revenues on the wastewater side of approximately $1.5 million. And if there's any shortfall there, then as one of the other counselors pointed out earlier, there are pretty healthy reserves right now for the combined utility, and that's where that money would come from.
And the IP, what does that mean? Cost?
That is the capital improvement program. And on the preceding set of, or the preceding chart, where we showed the new debt service and new cash finance CIP, those are basically the exact same numbers as on this chart. In retrospect, I probably should have made the colors the same between the two charts, but you'll see the top two portions of the stacked bar chart, the red set of bars and the yellow set of bars correlate exactly with the CIP costs from the preceding table in cyan and dark green. So an important point to that is even if you take away all of the capital improvements, your water rates significantly are under providing a revenue stream that does not allow for basically the full cost of the water system here in the city, even before we start talking about the significant capital expenses that you have coming. That's important to recognize. So similarly on the sewer side, and what you'll see here is a little bit different situation. And as you'll note there on the left-hand side, the revenues currently are significantly above the annual costs. And that's why the sewer has been able to, the excess revenues in sewer have been able to basically balance the combined enterprise fund books on a year-by-year basis. But what you'll also notice is once we account for the CIP in coming years, that situation goes away. But the relative change is going to be significantly smaller than it will be on the water side. Okay. So we were asked to basically take a look at a number of scenarios, but one of the scenarios that we're going to show you tonight, the analysis is basically predicated on four things. The first being, let's just, for this analysis, maintain the existing rate structure. What we talked about before, the same basic rate structure is going to remain in force. We're going to fully fund the operations, maintenance, and debt service and all the future capital expenditures and investments that need to be made in order to maintain the system in an operable state. And then over time, we're going to transition from the state in this analysis. We're going to transition from a state where sewer revenues are being used to help balance the water books to really over 5 years, a situation where both of the utilities are supporting themselves independently, even though they remain in the same enterprise fund. It's just really making sure that the revenues associated with the utility are actually providing for the expenses associated with running the utility. And then to the fourth bullet is we wanted to make sure we maintain reasonable balances within your reserves accounts, because one way of looking at it, and it's the way that most accountants that I know do, is that enterprise funds, for all intents and purposes, are a going concern, as they would put it, and need operating reserves because, you know, we are talking about a lot of money in this case. And if under state law, as a matter of fact, if enterprise funds run out of money, that deficit falls onto the general fund. And obviously, that's not a situation that anyone either would like to see happen or envisions happening here in Salem. So we make sure that that doesn't happen as well. So again, the premise for these rate or cost increases on this table is basically we maintain the existing basic rate structure. We use across the board annual increases for water and sewer, and they're different increases. And we have a 5-year sunset of the sewer revenue transfer. And really what that means is over the next 5 years, we need to make up for the $1.5 million that's been transferred historically annually, as well as we have to account for some of the growth that's going to be occurring. And just to put that into layman's terms, right now, $1.5 million additional revenue on water is 25% of your current revenue base. And so that's sort of the starting point, is making that adjustment even before the budgets continue to grow, as we know they will due to inflation and all the other factors that come into play. But after we do that analysis, these are the annual increases for 2 hypothetical customers here in Salem. Now, in gray at the top, that's about your 50th percentile customer. Is 5 CCF is 100 cubic feet. And that's that is the unit by which customers here are billed. That's what your rates are set in, is in CCF. But if you combine the increases in annual or in monthly bill for water and sewer for fiscal 24, they would be about $2.80 more per month for that 5 CCF customer. And likewise, if we look at a person up at 12 CCF, which is about the 85th percentile here in the city of Salem, that increase would be about $6.72 a month with an across the board rate increase. And again, this would be doing 2 things. It would be beginning the transition away from sewer revenues, helping to finance water, and would be making sure that we're growing the overall revenues commensurate to the overall growth in expense of running the utilities.
Council McLean.
Thank you, Chair. Are we talking about residential rates here?
We are talking about residential rates on this sheet, yes.
And these numbers that are broken out over these fiscal years, are these whole numbers? This is the actual monthly increase, or are we talking about the increase per gallon charge?
No, that's the increase in dollars per month for 5 CCF in the top. Now, the one thing I will say is, so for example, in 24, that means that a 5 CCF customer, their average monthly bill would be $2.80 more per month in fiscal 24 than it is in 23. And then going to the next column, in 2025, it'll be $2.95 more than the 280 increase. And so in 2025, the actual bill will be about $5.75 higher than it was in 2023. So the columns here are additive. I want to be clear on that. But these are the actual dollar figures for customers of these size. And as I said, the top bar in gray is around your 50th percentile residential customer. And the bottom portion of the chart is about your 85th percentile, meaning 85% of customers use that amount of water or less. So.
Thank you for those clarifications about it being additive and about the set points, about 50% and 85%. Very helpful.
Great.
Council Merkel.
Thank you, Chair Marcillo. What percent increase is that? Because I often get asked that from people. What percent did it go up?
Sure. So
The numbers.
it's 9% on the water. And a big chunk of that, to be clear, a big chunk of the change in water is because we are attempting to get rid of the sewer providing the revenue for the water operation. So we have a 5-year period in this assessment where we're trying to not only account for growth in costs, but also account for getting rid of that revenue transfer. And so on water, it's 9%, on sewer, it's 3%. And for the average customer, because sewer is more expensive than water, it's probably around 5%, right around 5% combined. So.
thing. So just for clarity, it goes up about 5% each year total
the
combined. It
combined bill.
balances- Yeah, balancing the higher for the sewage and the lower for
The lower
Flip-
for the
sorry,
sewerage and higher
flip-flops
for
that.
water.
It
Yes,
comes to about 5% each year.
in actual cost, yes,
Okay.
in dollar cost.
Okay, thank you.
Council Cohen.
Thank you, Chair Marcelo. I just did a quick calculation, just so people are clear. Even though it looks a dramatic difference, the cost to gallons is exactly the same, 2.4. The number of, so it's not increasing the rate, it's just, you're just multiplying. You just, so the 5 cubic feet versus 12 is a 2.4 calculation of 2.4 more on the bigger one. And the rate is exactly.
So these are not rates on this table. I want to be clear. These are the changes in monthly water and sewer bills.
I agree. What I'm saying is that it's a little misleading looking at the chart. The chart is just saying if you use more, pay more. It's not relatively more or less based on your usage. The rate is still the same.
That's correct, yes. Other than on the wastewater side, which this is all residential, so indeed you're correct. But for non-residential customers on sewer, of course, you do have a tiered rate, so.
Counselor Stop.
Thank you, Chair. And this might be more of a question for Mr. Knowlton. I don't think anybody would be surprised to know that I obsessively track my bills, including my water bill. So I was going through to see, because that 5 CCF a month or 125 gallon a day, it didn't ring as noticeable as a number to me. So I'm wondering if that's tracked on our bills that are provided to our residents. Like I have noted for usage. On my last bill, it says 883. Previous to that, it was 894. So I'm just wondering if that comparison is something that residents can utilize and look at. I know they've recently redesigned the bill, but I just want to make sure that that number is like translatable for us.
Talking about changing the bills to a gallon basis rather than 100 cubic feet. Sorry, I couldn't hear your question clearly.
I don't know. I don't recall either of those numbers, the 5 CCF a month or 125 gallon a day. Are those bill numbers currently on our utility bill? The bill that we receive for water?
Counselor, I might be able to address that. No, those wouldn't be on any specific individual's personal bill. These are hypothetical customers based on average use in the city for a residential customer and then an 85th percentile use. So
Right. So I'm trying to figure out if I'm an average use or a higher or lower. Like I'm trying to see like what, an increase would be if somebody came to me for a question. So it would be helpful to have that information, kind of translate it to how we present the usage on our bills. That's all.
okay.
So I think, what does the bill show? Does it show the CCF or does it show the gallon? CCF. So the numbers that we get for the reading, the water meter reading, is the CCF number. Does that help, Councilor Stott?
Is it? I just wanted to confirm that it
Yes.
was.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Oh, Councilor Hapworth.
Thank you, Chair Marcelo. And this is probably a super basic question, but just so I understand this here. These rates from FY24 to FY28, these are cumulative. So this is, I think, $18. Is that correct? From FY24 to FY28. Am I reading that right and understanding it right?
That looks about correct. Yes, about $18 a month.
Okay. And what is the percent increase from 24 to 25? I'm sure the math.
From both 23 to 24 and 24 to 25 are both 9%.
24 to 28 is what
I don't have that. It stays in the high single digits all the way. If you recall, do you mind if I scroll backward in the presentation a little bit? We need, just looking at this chart, we need to get from on the left-hand side, the dashed line, basically to the top of the yellow bar over the course of the next decade. And what you can see is that is basically a doubling. And, rule of 70, 7% a year for 10 years is basically a doubling of revenue. Now, we do have to front end load that a little bit because we're trying to catch up. Catch up more quickly in order to get rid of the sewer revenue transfer. It allows us to keep the sewer rate increases lower. But you're correct that over the decade, they're going to be pretty substantial. But that said, I would never say these aren't really large bills, but by Boston and New England standards, these are the level of bills here in the city is actually very reasonable by regional standards anyway. Okay, I'll scroll back forward. And just so everyone has an idea of how the city of Salem stacks up against your peers, these are the annual bills for residential customers in the different communities, combined water and sewer. You can see that in Salem, for a customer using 5 CCF per month in fiscal 23, the annual bill would be about $678. And under the rates as we've run this scenario, they would go up to around $714 over the course of the full year. So, and then we provide the exact same metric for other communities here on the North Shore.
Counselor Cohen.
Thank you, Chair Marcello. Just a quick question. This might be for David. We supply the water to Peabody, so why would they be 40% less than us?
We do not supply water to people.
Peabody is not in the reservoir?
No.
that we own?
No, it's just Salem and Beverly.
Salem and Beverly?
That's it. Yes.
Counselor Presnowski.
Going over to the sewer side of the math over here. You know that Salem has the Southeast Sewage District, so we take the sewerage from ourselves and 4 other communities, including Peabody. What I'm trying to get at, I guess, is that does Salem get a break because it's all coming here and we're processing it over here? And if so, why does it show that the other communities seem to have a lesser rate? I know it's a combined rate, but we're doing the yeoman's work.
That question.
We have 5 communities, including ourselves, that use Southeast Sewage District. I'm looking at lower, they're paying lower than we are, yet we're doing the work for, the plant is here. I mean, does Salem get a break because we have the sewage plant here?
So we do,
And
yes.
And Marblehead's numbers, by the way, aren't in here. And I'd be curious to know what that is.
So we do get a payment in lieu of taxes that's calculated for all of the, based on flow and the budgets. And it's divided over the other communities it's our host fee. It's a really flat rate. It's $500,000 a year. And it's something that we've been actively, our mayor and the previous mayor have been actively trying to elevate that. That went into place 25 years ago when the secondary plant was built. And, we would like to see if there's a potential to increase that to reflect increased costs for us and impacts on the residents.
I did not know that we had that 500,000 on the host fee. Thank you.
So don't go anywhere. So besides the pilot, which is severely out of date, we get no discount for having the SESD here housed in Salem. So everyone pays the same rate.
Essentially, yes.
Okay.
The amounts that the different communities pay is based on flows, which is the actual gallons that come into the plant, and loads. So the SESD staff measures total suspended solids and BOD, which is really the higher those things are, the more difficult wastewater is to treat. So everybody gets sampled, and there's a whole flows and loads calculation that gets done. It's a document that's about 1 inch thick every year for our budget. That's how we set the percentages of who pays what.
So is this suggesting that Salem produces more sewerage than Beverly and Peabody? Yes.
Essentially, yes. Could, yes. I'd have to go back and look through the historical numbers to see how much, how the percentages change. It all depends on it's the size of their systems, it's the age and quality of the piping that it goes through, does it leak, things like that. There's all kinds of components that come into play with that.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Presnowski?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I imagine that the other four communities are paying $2 million a year to the city of Salem for hosting the sewage plant. And that is offsetting, that's the reason why that we got more money in the sewage account to offset the water bills for our residents.
No, the revenues into the sewer account that are being used to help fund water operations are purely from sewer bills here in Salem. They're not associated with the SESD whatsoever. The SESD within the financial model and on your budget is carried as basically a line item number to the best of my knowledge. If I say anything wrong here, Dave, by all means, jump in. But to Dave's point earlier, you know, the bill that you get from SESD also reflects the amount of things like groundwater and stormwater that flow into the sewers, because as Dave was mentioning, your assessment is largely based on your flow share percentage over at the treatment plant. So if you have a lot of stormwater running into your sewers, you know, SESD can't count a gallon that's flushed versus a gallon that runs in through a misconnected, you know, roof drain or something like that. And so you pay the same regardless. And so indeed, I can't speak to whether or not that's the case, but certainly there's that type of influence when you're talking about a cost sharing model, the way that SESD has set up, that could impact those and result in differential billings in different communities for what might seem like the same thing.
So I understand that part of it, and I know that Salem's done a lot of work in separating the sewer lines and the water lines. I think we're in pretty good shape. That all the work that's been done over the years. My basic question is that the $2 million that we're getting from the other communities.
Wait. We're not getting $2 million from the other communities. We're getting $500,000 shared across the communities.
We get 500,000.
$500,000,
The other communities split the 500.
correct,
I'm sorry.
since 1993. Yes.
500,000.
Nope.
Community. Okay, but still substantial amount of money. It goes into the general fund. Okay, all right. Thank you.
Council McLean.
Thank you, Chair. So, coming from the perspective of somebody who does not obsessively track their bills and just pays the water bill when it arrives at my house, do residents receive a bill that makes a differentiation between, or that makes a differentiation between their water usage and their sewer usage? Is that information that's available at the point of residences? I'm seeing yes over from the corner. Okay. So, so that said, my question is, you know, the implication of everything that we've seen so far seems to be that there is some sort of potential advantage, or there may be an advantage to separating the funding of these. I understand the idea that the sewer is subsidizing the water. I can see that here. But what I'm not seeing is what is the relative advantage to actually separating these funds? It seems like there has been a utility to having these funds joined, right? The sewer has been subsidizing the water. So what do we gain if we consider structurally changing the way this fund is set up versus maintaining it the way it is now? We understand the underlying numbers. What benefit and cost do we have staying where we are versus moving to a different structure?
So, excellent question. So we take, when I say we, I mean me and Raftelis, we have no position on whether you change the legal structure. When I talk about structure, I'm just purely talking about a rate structure. And so the concept here isn't that somehow it's better. It's that if we have a service that is costing the city of Salem a certain number of dollars, is it more highly aligned from an equitability standpoint to make sure that what we charge for that service generates the cost of providing the service? Because right now you have one service that you're charging an amount that basically produces about $1.5 million more than you need to fund that service, and another that you're undercharging. So is structurally, honestly, the state probably doesn't look at it one way or the other. They look at the enterprise fund as an entire unit. And so, you know, you certainly as a city have the option to say raise rates across the board 5% rather than that being the blended percent increase. You know, water goes up 1%, the same as sewer. I think traditionally, I suspect that's what's happened, and that's how we've gotten to this situation where your sewer revenues are generating more than the water revenues compared to their expenses, is that you probably just, I've seen other communities, I can't speak for Salem in this case, other communities where that similar process, where you have a combined enterprise fund and you end up in a situation where the revenues that are charged for one service are actually, you know, providing the revenue needed to give the other service, simply as a result of the community saying, well, we're just going to go up across the board the same percentage for a number of years, even though the cost picture between the two utilities has changed. And so really it's a policy decision, pardon me, a policy decision for the city to determine, is this something you want to change? This is not scripture.
Anna?
Thank you. And just to add to that, Toby's entirely right in his explanation. And I think it appears that what's happening over time is that the rates have been increasing based on the next year's needed costs just to keep the fund in balance. And so they've been increasing by those inflationary measures. But at some point, the sewer was producing more revenue. And what's happening is that it's escalating. And I think we wanted this inflection point just to say, as a policy matter, is the community comfortable with the fact that the sewer rates are on an escalating basis subsidizing the water rates? Is that an affirmative policy choice that the community has made? And do we want that to continue? Or under this model, do we want, as Toby was mentioning, to have the utilities, you know, independently self-sustaining? I would recommend that the fund be remained as one fund. It's technically two separate funds in our accounting system, but it's one fund as we report to the state. And that has a ton of benefits because again, if something happened for whatever reason and we didn't generate the revenues we thought from one or the other, the fund will still be in balance. We're not going to have issues closing the year. So I do think it should still, I would recommend it stay one fund, but it's just looking for feedback on, is it the correct policy choice to have the sewer rates subsidizing the water rates, or should we make those rates reflective of what the cost is to maintain the infrastructure?
So just to follow on that, so the existence of these two accounting funds as one reporting fund, as an enterprise fund to the state, doesn't dictate the rates that we set for these individual services, to be clear about that. And what we have before us is not necessarily a recommendation to separate that enterprise fund into two enterprise funds. And third, what I'm taking from this presentation is that whatever course we choose, that ability of the sewer fund to subsidize the water is projected to disappear anyway, because the costs are going to escalate such that there's not going to be a surplus regardless. Is that all correct?
Unless the city decided to continue with these, we're going to raise each utility the same amount, still covering the overall costs, in which case probably sewer would, for some time, continue to provide a subsidy to the water side. So it's, as Anna correctly pointed out, it's a policy decision. Does this seem like the right way, or do we want to make an adjustment?
Do we have a sense of what the impact would be in real numbers on the total bill for the resident if we did continue to raise the rates in a flat way and allow the one to subsidize the other? And what does that look like for the actual bill that comes out the other side? Because that's what the residents are going to care about.
Right. So it's a great question. And the fact of the matter is where the overall dollars under either of those scenarios are the same, the average resident's bill is going to be almost identical. You know, there might be small differences at the margins because the sewer has a multi-tier on the non-residential customers. But from the standpoint of the overall dollars being what we expect them to be, the average resident's bill, whether it's split, you know, $1 of water for every $3 of sewer, or 2 and 2, the overall bill is going to be about the same. There's not going to be a large benefit to any customer class by making or not making this change. It's just trying to say, as a policy decision, does the city want to align water revenues with water expenses more closely than they've currently been tracking?
Thank you.
Counselor Stott.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, so I'm trying to wrap my head around the similar questions of what the effect is here on the users, and it kind of come up with two questions in my head. We do currently now present the water rate and the sewer rate and what those costs are on the bill, but I think the regular residential customer just gets charged equal amount of usage, correct, for water and sewer, unless you have that separate outdoor water line. So that's really where I think the effect is here. So right now, those that have the outdoor water line are essentially being charged a lower rate. If we're saying water is a higher cost, but it's just one. So I think that's ultimately where the hurt would be for the residents of those that have that outside line that are watering their gardens, filling their pools. They're now going to have to pay at the higher water rate versus right now they're kind of getting a deal of not having to pay the sewer and paying a lower rate, even though the cost of the water that they're using is higher. Am I understanding that? Okay, I kind of see your
I think
head
that's
nodding.
an excellent point, Councilor Stott.
Okay, so I think I'm curious, I guess, how many residents we have that utilize that. But then also, I would just say I am comfortable with that because I don't think that that's really a usage that I would like to incur or encourage. Similarly, I remember this past summer, we had quite a drought and driving around all the different towns, you could see the drought signs and no outdoor water usage, et cetera. And there was nothing in Salem. And I understand that we didn't have a low reserve of water, but I think we're kind of lucky in that regard. And I think that this would help encourage better usage and just kind of clearer intent of the water resource that we have when we're charging appropriately for using it. That's all.
I mean, that's a good question. Do we know how many customers use the deduct meter?
I don't have that information at my fingertips. We did indeed take a look at the database, though. We were able to replicate billings.
Just generally, just
In general, I think it is about 1,000.
1,000?
A little bit more deduct meters out there
Okay,
that are
all right. I was just generally curious. Counselor Merkel.
Thank you, Chair Masillo. No, actually, thanks for all the explanations. It's helpful, and I actually am following it. And it sounds like we can charge two separate amounts with it still just being one, line item and not pulling them apart. And it sounds like overall, it's a little bit more responsible bookkeeping than just having, a rate that's inflated because it's offsetting something else. I think it's a little bit more transparent and more, kind of a better bookkeeping practice that we're charging the rates to cover the expenses for that. So in theory, I do support that. And yeah, also as I think of to what Councilor Stott had said, the water one alone, I used to in my old house have a separate, not in Salem, a separate meter for watering the lawn. And it might help people be a little more mindful of, how long has the sprinkler been on? Am I correct? And that's the kind of water would get the higher rate that doesn't have the sewage meter, just so I'm
Well,
understanding that.
it's all of the water will get the higher rate. It's just that the folks
Higher
who,
percent.
yes,
Yeah.
all of the water would go up by the same percent between the two different years. But indeed, by shifting more of the cost onto the water, you would provide a more of a conservation message in the rates. That's for sure.
Yeah, so I am interpreting that correctly.
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Counselor Varela, did you have a question? No? Counselor Cohen.
Yeah, this is more a comment based on the comments that Councilor Stott and McLean brought up. In my lifetime in the solar business, I always resentful of the electric utilities for creating confusing bills so that ratepayers do not fully understand what they're paying as a rate. So as Councilor McLean said, they see $150 and they say, okay, $150. The rate may have gone up dramatically or not, and the next bill might have been $160, and they're like, okay, it's about the same. But their rate may have been 30% more. So there's a lot of issues that the state has brought up with the electric utilities based on that, line items. For example, National Grid bill has like 16 line items, and some of them may not actually mean anything, and they're hundreds of pennies, but they all add up. In the Sustainability, Energy, and Resiliency Committee, when I was the vice chair, Councilor Varela was at those meetings where, and I know Mr. Knowlton knows about this, we talked at length about the actual bill for the water bill. And I'm not saying that cubic feet is much different than gallons, but there's potentially not enough information on the bill that would lead the customer to know whether their usage changed as much as the total bill changed. So they're just looking at it, you know, like, oh, I paid $120 this month and similar next month, but they don't really know if their rate changed or the usage changed. So I do believe that those are issues to address, because as Councilor Stott said, if the customer calls us or the city and tries to get the bill explained, it's very difficult to correlate. Does that make sense? And it worries me because I really want to talk a little bit more. I know last year Councilor Varela brought this up, you know, and Councilor Stott did just a little while ago about conservation. So I'm personally, I know there's a movement about some within the watershed for Salem not to be able to control our ability to manage water the way we do differently than the communities that receive water from us. So there are communities, like Councilor Stott said, that you drive around and they have a water ban or something. So they're definitely conserving water. And when we don't, even when there's a drought, we're not encouraging any kind of conservation at all.
Counselor Stott has a question.
Thank you. Just a follow-up, I guess, to a lot of those points, I agree. I will note that there has been a change on the water bill since those CERC conversations, and I do appreciate that. Like, it does show the usage historically. I think it's like 6 months at least of usage. It's in CS or CCS, that CS that are presented tonight, but I just did some quick math and I figured it out, and I'm way below the average bill. Anyway, but I'm curious so I do appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that though. And I think I very much to Councilor Cohen's point, that was a big item that CERC really advocated for, of none of this really means anything unless if we can see usage and how it relates. And now I think a step forward would have to be separating that out between water and sewage as well with usage, because right now it's just one usage number. So to me, that is water and sewer that's being billed at that. I'm really curious though about that 1,000 users that are utilizing the water only. And I know you don't have that information now, but I think when you're diving into it deeper, presenting it more, if that has any effect on our water costs and why they're higher, because it just seems like a large number. I don't know how all of that cost would be associated though, but I was really surprised when you said 1,000. That seems like a high number to me. So I'm wondering if we're kind of subsidizing water usage there, but all very interesting. And I just wanted to.
So just so I'm clear, do you mean comparatively with Beverly and Peabody, the number that use deduct meters there?
No, just comparatively to like overall water usage in the city. Like, is that a lot of water that they're using? Because obviously it's a large number that they went or that, the user is getting a separate reader for it. I'm just wondering how much that wouldn't drastically change revenue.
So if I could maybe ask Dave, maybe a little bit more information on what kinds of uses the deduct meters are in the city. If it, residential, is it commercial? Just to get an idea of these 1,000 deduct meters that are out there, how much water usage are they?
Yeah, there are residential and there's commercial properties that use them. It's mainly for irrigation. But there are some heating and cooling systems use water in that cooling process where the water evaporates. So for instance, the power plant and Salem State has some coolers that they use deduct meters to account for that water that just does not get into the sewer system. Goes through their main meter, that doesn't go out to the sewer system.
To the, okay. Counselor Varela.
Thank you, Chair Marcello. I did ask for these numbers from the engineering office about deduct meters last October. And thank you for your office for providing those. So real quick, I'll go through them. Some people are asking about these. The number of residential accounts is 9,096. Accounts with deduct meters are 1,054. For commercial accounts, there's 882 commercial accounts, 67 have a deduct meter, and concerning the 57 municipal accounts, 1 has a deduct meter. Thank you.
So Dave, so the residential accounts that have these deduct meters, why do they have them?
It's for outside irrigation.
Outside irrigation.
Sometimes they want to fill a pool,
Okay,
things like that.
okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that this does follow along with the need to separate the two and make the water more accountable, yeah, okay, good. Thank you.
Okay, moving forward, I just want to reiterate, so we've gone through the scenario that we prepared these numbers, the actual bill impact numbers for. I did want to point out some of the other things that over the past several months that we worked with Dave and Anna on looking, and really what some of those are now. Just going top to bottom, and this is in no specific order, we took a look at taking the basically taking the minimum charge that you have and just moving straight over to a fixed monthly fee that comes with no consumption. It'd be very similar to say, example, the meter charge that you receive when you sign up for electric service. I don't know what the exact rate for NSTAR is right now, but I think it's around $8 or $9 per month just to have the meter on the house without buying a single kilowatt hour. This would work similar to that. In order to be connected to the water or the sewer system, you just have a fixed charge. These types of charges are quite popular in other communities. We decided not to include it in our scenario analysis in this case, simply because on a percentage of bill increase, generally speaking, you hit the smallest users the hardest when you take one of those, because you take a minimum charge that includes usage and you replace it with a charge that has no usage. So they're paying both the fixed charge and then all of the water they use beyond that. And so that can have a very large impact on very small users, oftentimes retirees and such. We did take a peek at multi-tier water rates as well. Salem has obviously quite a few residential properties that have multiple units being provided with water through a single meter. And in order to make sure that accounts like that are treated equitably, some of the data that we would need to do that assessment was a bit difficult to discern. And so by definition, let's say you have 30 units that go through a single meter and you adopt an unadjusted multi-tier rate structure, where you say similar to what we have on the non-commercial or on the non-residential side for sewer, you would go through the first tier very quickly and thus be paying very high water rates on a vast, or not a vast, but a significant portion of the water use. And the feeling was that that might not be appropriate for Salem right now. On the sewer revenue transfer side, I mean, you can maintain your existing practice. As we've mentioned a couple times, this is entirely a policy decision. It does, if you were to go along that, you do have a partial misalignment of where you derive your revenues from what drives the costs of providing the public service to the city. The one that I think you may be interested in taking a strong look at, because this is something that's very common, not just here in New England, but really throughout the nation, is fire service fees. And these are basically fees that are assigned to people who have hard, non-metered, hard piped connections to the city's water system for the provision of fire prevention. So for example, sprinkler systems in large buildings. There's a very large financial benefit to the owners of buildings like that by having the city of Salem has invested a lot of money in the water system, and by having the ability to tap, 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 gallons a minute from the city's water system provides a very large benefit to that, to those customers in the form of reduced fire insurance payments. And there is real cost associated with that excess capacity. If all that happened in Salem was, washing hands and flushing toilets, you wouldn't probably have a water main larger than 6 inches. Whereas everything in the system is sized to fight fires because the diameter of the pipes, they're all larger than you need to, run showers and dishwashers in order to be able to fight fires. And basically assigning the proportional cost that's associated with those extra expenses is an appropriate use. It's a standard that's recommended by the American Water Works Association. And we have prepared some preliminary figures for what we think the revenue would be on that if you were to decide to go with it. Yes.
Councilor Cohen.
Thanks, President Marcillo. To you, Toby. I don't know if you have the answer to this. Very interesting. We have new rules to encourage accessory dwelling units in Salem. And I know my wife and I independently are looking at either constructing a new one or converting a space. In the process, it triggers a sprinkler. And my building is a multifamily, which triggers a sprinkler system for the entire building, which can be, pretty costly, especially if you have to tap into the city's water line instead
Yes.
of a tank. Okay.
Yep.
Are you following me? So the question I have is, you mentioned that, and I'm asking you so that we're not discouraging this conversion. Do you think it's relatively less in the insurance cost that would make up for the increase if we add these fees on if the customer is paying more for a fire service fee, is that offset by the reduced cost in insurance?
I certainly don't speak for fire insurance companies. What I do know is that one of the standard metrics that water providers are measured on by a organization called the Insurance Services Organization, is they go around and they measure fire flows available in cities, and they set their fire insurance rates based upon the amount of flow. If your building is next to intersection that they know you can get 3,000 gallons a minute out of the fire hydrant right there, there is, I believe, a pretty significant discount in fire insurance. Now, I can't speak anything to that. On smaller properties, these fees don't end up being very expensive on an annual basis. They're basically, the way they're usually implemented is an annual fee. Obviously, since it's unmetered, it doesn't come with any CCF charge. And if the sprinklers do go off, and this is the policy in almost every city, people aren't charged for the water that's used. It's the service that's provided by the fee. And the rationale, just to be clear, is that the average home in most cities does not have a hard pipe firefighting connection to the city infrastructure. And so indeed, when we calculate the amount of revenue that we think should be recovered from these, we adjust for the fact that the majority of the firefighting capacity in the system really is to the benefit of the city and is assigned to city fire hydrants, and private residents don't pay that portion of the benefit. They pay a much smaller subset for the private fire systems and private hydrants that are connected to the water system.
Counselor McLean.
Thank you, Chair. Are you aware, and you may not be, are you aware of any organization or any large property, I should say, that does have a hard pipe connection for sprinkler service with the city that has attempted to meter the use of that service versus actually pay the fee to the city as a way of saying, I don't actually use this that much, I don't want to pay it?
So I'm not a fire protection engineer. Generally speaking, most of these systems are dry pipes. Dave, maybe you can speak to this, but they're unmetered specifically because meters greatly impede the flow of water at high velocity. And that's the only way these systems work. So by putting a meter in one of these, you would actually, in many ways, obviate its ability to fight a fire, because the water needs to kick on immediately under high pressure and high velocity in order to make the sprinklers work. And a meter would prevent that from occurring. So you really can't meter these connections.
Thank you.
Counselor Merkel.
Thank you, Chair Masillo. So just that I have an understanding, since the sprinkler systems we'd be doing, we'd be charging an extra fee, but they really don't run the water. It's for when there's a fire. So
That's right.
I don't know how well that sits saying that, yeah, they need to pay for the water when it's not really running. I understand that you're basing the cost on because the system would cost money to put in, but aren't they already paying for that system to be put in? And then we'd be charging for water that's, not potentially going to be used, hopefully. I'm just a little
Exactly.
confused
To
on
be
that.
clear, the water through a fire connection, I've never worked with a municipality who attempts to quantify and then charge people for water that goes through a fire suppression system. The incremental cost that is intended to be recovered by these charges isn't associated with the plumbing inside of the private property. It's associated with the fact that when the engineers were speaking to the city of Salem and deciding on what size, main goes down the middle of Washington Street, that main is not sized based on the amount of water that's going to go through water meters. It's sized based upon the amount of water that might need to go through fire hydrants and fire suppression systems. And there's a significant cost differential between a 6-inch pipe and a 12-inch pipe. And so the rationale, as I said, this is a policy that's supported by the American Waterworks Association in their rate setting manual. The rationale is that for the average residential person who doesn't have a hard pipe fire connection into the system, right? By definition, then they're subsidizing the other users who do, because the average person who pays, 5 CCF a month and doesn't have a fire suppression system in their house is paying the same rate as the apartment building who may be using 5 CCF a month per resident. But guess what? They also have 3,000 gallons a minute that'll turn on like that. And there's value to that, is basically the assertion and the underlying principle that is the basis of this fee, is that the city had to invest to be able to provide that benefit. And that benefit only goes to a small portion of the overall number of customers of the system, meaning it only goes to the people who have a hard pipe fire connection.
Just to kind of ground this conversation, what kind of fees are you talking about? Are you talking about, you said it's an annual fee.
It's an annual fee. I would hate to just throw out numbers. I've got them. They're for normal size, like smaller homes that are multi-units. The annual charges are quite small because the diameters of those firefighting connections are quite small. This is preliminary numbers, just to be clear. I will give you our preliminary calculations. So the annual charge on a 1-inch fire line would be $10.23 annual. That's in addition to the water that goes through the meter that you're being charged for on a volumetric basis. really the main portion of revenue capture is on large industrial buildings where you have very large fire connections. You have fire connections up to 10 inches in diameter in this city that probably can access north of 5,000 gallons a minute if they need it. And it's making sure that the capacity in the overall system that's being provided by the city is that benefit, which is not applied equally across the entire customer base, is actually being paid for by the people who are getting that benefit. Right now, they're getting the benefit and there's no cost to them. The cost is being, or the benefit is being subsidized by everyone who's buying water at 5 CCF a month because it's included in your water rates right now. So.
Counselor Cohen.
Yeah, just real quick. I didn't mean to discourage the fee. I'm actually very much in favor of it. I met with Lieutenant Shoblin from the fire department, who was very clear that although it's probably required in multifamilies, things like an ADU would trigger that. The safety result is significant. There's almost no one dies in a fire in a house that has the
Fire suppression systems.
the ones that are connected to the pipe,
That's correct.
not the tank. And then the other thing is that in addition to a savings on insurance, which may be minimal, the property value increase is very high. For people who have these
Yeah.
systems, at least according to our fire department, it's very high. So I think the benefit to people who install these is not just safety, but financially.
That could be really the rationale for the fee, isn't to derive a portion of the benefit that a homeowner gets. It's really to help reimburse the city for a cost actually incurred for a benefit that is not equally received across the customer class. That's all. And it's using, as I said, a nationally recognized standard to do so.
Counselor Varela.
Thank you, Chair Marcillo. So I had a question after looking at this and rate options. I know one thing we haven't talked about is gray water systems or the incentivizing our residents to possibly look into it. I know costs are rising, but this is maybe the question for Mr. Knowlton, but we're not incentivizing any of our residents to actually save water or divert their wastewater in any sense. And I just think that going forward, if water rates are going up, this is something that our engineering department should take seriously, that there are some residents that actually want to figure out a way to divert their, let's say, their black water into gray water. And with that, most residents that would adopt a system like this would probably use a little more water in consumption. So is this something overall in the future for just lowering our water consumption and our sewage for our residents? Is this something that we can talk about to incentivize our residents to actually put these implements in place so they have less of a footprint on our water and our sewage?
Good question. And it is something that we should look at sooner rather than later, because it is going to continue to be an issue. There would be costs to do that. You'd be talking about replumbing houses. Certain fixtures would not have to go into the sewer. It could go somewhere else. Where that fits and sits on the property where that water goes, how it gets discharged or reused is something that would have to be worked out. It's not going to be a one size fits all program, but it is something that we can start to take a look at. Okay.
And then really the only other final thing that's, has a measurable ability, and to be clear, our initial cut at the fire service fees generates around 4% of water system revenues. And that revenue, obviously, if you have that increase from a new revenue source, you don't need the same rate increases that you need otherwise in order to generate the exact same system revenues. So just to be clear on what the net impact would be of that. And then finally, really the capital programs, those are the final big variable. Generally speaking, obviously we worry about the need for additional capital due to emergencies or unforeseen challenges, but, you know, deferring need and system investments can delay the need for rate increases in the near term, but long term, I think the record's pretty clear that that increases the long-term costs of maintaining the system in a usable form, simply because, you know, for example, on water pipes, you know, delaying replacement on water pipes leads to more breaks, and the most expensive way on earth to replace water pipe is in 50 to 100-foot sections when water main breaks happens. And so, you know, taking the really sharp pen to a CIP is not always the fiscally the most responsible thing, but it's certainly something that is a policy question and open to your purview as a council.
Counselor Cullen.
Thank you, President Morcillo. I have a few questions for Mr. Knowlton. Thank you, David. I'm going to start with Canal Street. I know the costs have escalated, you know, partly outside of, you know, what is under our control, trying to purchase land, whatever. Do you anticipate that at some point soon we'll be at a point where we can fix the costs, you know, that we'll come to a resolution with Salem State, for example? I mean, I'm assuming that's like the barrier right now.
Yeah.
Forward, okay.
Can we, hold on a minute. Can you stop screen share? So we can get back to video. And Dave, you need to talk right into the mic because I can see that the other counselors are having a really hard time hearing you when you speak. So.
So very good question. Salem State has interest in developing their parking lot with solar arrays. And, you know, we currently have an agreement in place with them that we would consult each other if the Canal Street project goes through, which is the 4 million gallon storage tank and the pump station. All the piping in Canal Street is done. All the discharge piping on Forest Ave and down Clifton into the harbor is done. So it's really just putting in the pump station and the storage tank that's there. We've got to figure that out. You know, we do have some current loan authorizations from City Council in the past that Anna mentioned, and that totals about 25 million, but we still need another 10 million to kind of get over that hurdle. We have, for the past 2 years, we've had 2 projects that are on the SRF list, which is the state revolving fund list for water and wastewater projects. We were just we were just below the cutoff line or above the cutoff line with points. So we weren't successful in this year to get that funding. Those programs have low interest rates, where 5 years ago they were not very competitive. We got to get better rates, you know, on our market buying our own things, but they're down in like the 2% interest rates now. And they also have a big thing called principal forgiveness, where they, you know, with all the ARPA money and the different funding sources out there, they're putting a lot of money into that. And that could be a substantial reduction in the principal. So that's like money right off the top. That could be 5, 10, 15% the cost. So when you're looking at that project, it's a big impact, but it's a challenge. It's a lot of money. It's a big impact to the water and sewer rates. And, you know, unfortunately we haven't had a real heavy downpour, long period of storm, much like we had back in the Mother's Day storm in 2006 and subsequent years after that. It seemed like we had repeatedly large storms. We just haven't seen that. We have seen a benefit from the large pipes that we put in Canal Street. There's more capacity for storage there, and it bleeds slowly back into the system. So we're not seeing the downstream impacts, but ultimately we have to decide what we're going to do, how we're going to do things, because, you know, now Salem State is kind of knocking at the door.
Well, thank you. And the solar canopy shouldn't impede the project from happening if they do that. Willow Ave pipe, the assumption, and you and I have talked about it with Council Prosnowski, none of the funding that you anticipate, short or long term, will come out of the city funds. It's all money that you're applying for from the state.
That's our plan. You can never say never, or it's going to happen, but our plan now is to use some FEMA money and also some other money, some other earmarks to make that work happen. Needs to happen.
Thank you. I mean, as you know, I'm going to be persistent certain things until you tell, or someone tells me or the council they're not viable. I've brought up some creative stuff that I know you're looking at, like turbines and water pipes, and there are things that we could do that may not shrink the water, amount, but it could positively affect other things like our electric usage or whatever. I'm just encouraging, you don't have to answer, encouraging you to pursue those if possible. And my last question is for some of the and this is not something you necessarily have to respond to today, you or Anna, whatever, but I'm hoping with the increased money that's available through the, Inflation Reduction Act, the infrastructure bill, and maybe some state funding with the new administration, that there may be some resources for some of the CIP programs that may not just burden Salem.
Absolutely. That's why we're looking at the SRF program. But we'll do everything we can to find funds.
Anna?
Thank you. I think I can give preliminary feedback on what projects we contemplated in this scenario, with the caveat that those aren't necessarily representative of final capital plan recommendations, because that process is still underway. And so the types of projects that were contemplated in the scenario that was presented tonight include things that have been typically authorized annually. So for example, investments for water transmission, main system improvements at similar levels that have been in past years. So for example, last year that was $1 million. So this scenario envisions a similar amount. Water distribution main system improvements for around $800,000, citywide flushing around $400,000. So again, those aren't final numbers that are necessarily, that you may or may not see exactly in that way in the capital plan book that we put in, we filed with the council. But for right now, that's what we've baked in. And then again, on the sewer side, the drain and sewer cleaning inspection replacement, the SSCS report, so eliminating the infiltration at similar rates as previous years. Those two things together are around $1 million annually. And so when I'm saying these numbers, I'm saying annually every year, kind of assuming a similar amount. And then there are specific projects, in particular, the ones that are very much on the horizon. And again, we're working to finalize the decisions on this, but looking at the Rosie's Pond flood protection and drainage system improvements and the Ocean Ave stormwater pump station replacement that has been pending on our capital plan for some time. And as I understand it, it's becoming, very, very timely that those are addressed. And together, those two projects, which are linked, are around $14 million. And so that is part of a major driver of the necessity for the water rate study, so that we could address how that would fit, because that's clearly a large project. And so it's the Ocean Ave stormwater pump station replacement and Rosie's Pond, Ocean Ave. Apologies, I'm probably talking.
Ocean Ave
very-
West.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ocean Ave West Pump Station, yeah.
Speaking very quickly. Yeah. And then there are other pump station improvements that we've attempted to potentially scenario out over a couple of years, but we're finalizing that. And then there are some other projects that are like toward the end of the decade and in the next decade that David, I might look to you to maybe explain any of those. And again, so things that are still preliminary, and that we would, again, work through whatever means we could to identify grants, to identify SRF funding for, but we wanted to just take the capital plan, map out what would be envisioned in a reasonable scenario to ensure that we're maintaining the city's infrastructure for delivering clean drinking water and to process sewage. And so, David, do you want to say anything about any of the out year items? And again, the out year items, I think maybe we could speak a little bit more to, because this is simply planning for a few years out and wouldn't necessarily be on the table for FY.
Thank you, Anna. One of the bigger things on the water side is that we installed a new water meter reading system about 10 years ago and replaced all the water meters. It's actually more than 10 years. It's like almost 12 years now.
Can you move the mic up?
The American Water Works Association does recommend that every 10 years, you start to think about replacing the meters, because over time they just start to degrade and they slow down. That means we're not accounting for all the water that's going through the meters and billing correctly. So we are asking this year, and you'll see it later in our budget discussions, $200,000 to start replacing some of the larger meters. Larger meters equate to the larger cash flow. So we want to attack those first and start to replace them. Some different meters, some same size meters, but we want to get that going. And then after that, there's an annual ask of about 500,000 a year to continue that. When we put the meter reading system in, originally, we spent about $4.5 million to do all of that. That put the reading system in place and replaced the meters. So it's not going to be that size over time, but it's going to be a substantial cost. The cost of meters right now are very expensive, and it takes a long time to get them along back order process. The other things that are out there 4 or 5 years down the road are rehabilitations to our 2 drinking water storage tanks. We have that large tank in Folly Hill in Danvers. It's a 10 million gallon underground storage tank. It's concrete. And over time, the type of water that goes through there degrades the concrete. So we did a rehab project about 6 years ago and spent a few $1 million on that to just go inside and repair all the issues that we found with the concrete that's there, and just making sure that's up to speed and it's going to operate for us in the future. Same thing with the Gallows Hill tank. That's a different tank. It's a steel tank and it's above ground. We painted that and we added a mixer to it about 4 years ago. So I'm just anticipating, at some point in time, 4 or 5 years out, we're going to need to do that again, just because over time things just start to deteriorate. We also have a main pump station up at the Salem Beverly Water Board, which supplies all the water. It takes the water out of the clear well of the treatment plant and pumps to Folly Hill and pumps to the city of Salem. That is an old station. It's running well for us now, but I can see in the next 4 or 5 years, we're going to have to do some major rehabs to that. That could be upwards of $2 or $3 million to make those improvements. On the stormwater side, Anna mentioned the Rosie's Pond project, which it's not really Rosie's Pond. It's the outlet from the pond that goes from the pond underneath the commuter rail, goes over to Lawrence Street, crosses Lawrence Street and goes down Brooks Street, crosses Jefferson Ave and goes behind the houses on Jefferson Ave all the way down to Dove Ave, where that connects at the hospital entrance. That project is something that we really want to get going on very soon. It's replacing the berms that protect the stream from overtopping in high flows. So it's a lot of backyard work, and that's what's taking a little bit of time. We're working with all the residents to make sure that they understand exactly what we're doing, get them to sign off on the work and the space that we need to do that work. And then there's also the pump station, which is part of that. So the berms will keep the stormwater flows in the stream itself, but all the rain that falls outside of that in that area all goes to an existing pump station that is in really tough shape. It was put in the 70s when the berm was put in. Has old screws, old technology for pumping. We actually had one screw pump that failed, so we're relying on one pump. So it's something that we need to do. It's a small building, has old outdated electric service, and doesn't have any standby power. So we would completely redo that, redo it, put a new structure there, and it would be most likely hopefully done with the berm work because it's located very close to the berm. Then the other pump stations we talked about, we had, I think everybody knows we had an issue at Highland Avenue this past summer, and I don't want to have that happen again. So I've asked a firm to come in and look at all of our stations. We typically do a 5-year capital plan every 5 years, and we work through that plan. But I actually had them come in and took a special look at all the different pump stations. We have 8 different wastewater pump stations, and we have 2 water pump stations, and then the stormwater pump station. So this would primarily focus on the wastewater pump stations, just to go in and make sure everything is up to snuff. Some of these stations are very old. They've been converted from a different type of pump station to its current state, and likely they'll have to be placed, a good portion of them. But it's something that we want to do. We want to get started. And you'll see in our CIP request, it's about a total of a $3.2 million request. We can split it up over 2 years and just do half at a time. But it's a significant cost of like 1.6 million.
You could put some solar panels on some of them while you're doing that.
As long as there's no trees. Yeah.
So you said that we have 8 wastewater pump stations and 2 stormwater pump stations? One stormwater. And how many water stations?
2. We have the main station up at the water board that provides all the water to the city, fills up our storage tanks, and then the system operates off the storage tanks. Then we have the Highland Ave booster station.
Okay. I got a lot of questions from some of my residents up there. Is there any plan to have a backup pump station
There's backup pumps in the station itself. We just had a failure of the piping
Okay.
that the pumps were connected to and discharging out. So we basically took the entire station and replaced it.
Okay.
Rebuilt the motors, we put new controls in, we put all new piping in the station itself. So we essentially have a new station.
Brand new station.
Existing building, yeah.
Okay. And it has backup power.
Yes, as a standby generator, yes.
So it's all good to go. So they're not going to worry for many years.
Should be good. There are still some improvements we want to do in Highland Ave itself. We know that the state MassDOT is advancing plans to reconstruct that road, and there are still some sections. We did replace a section of the 16-inch main that was there. We actually lined the pipe that was giving us problems, but there's other 16-inch pipe that we want to replace as well, and that's coming up in the next near future, not next year, but in the next couple of years. We have cost to do that because we want to make sure that the piping is good once MassDOT comes in and reconstructs the road. We want to be digging it up for a water break. Same issue on Loring Ave. We want to, that's not really scheduled by MassDOT to do any resurfacing work, but we did replace a good section of that main, but there's some more to be done to get down into Binnen Square to replace all that old pipe. So
What about Boston Street?
Boston Street looks good. We've looked at all the sewers and the drains. We don't see anything major there. There is a section of the roadway that's going to be lowered slightly. So currently there is a section of water pipe that's going to be replaced, a significant amount. I think it's 1,500 feet, almost 2,000 feet. So that now will be replaced as part of the cost of the construction,
Okay.
which is good. It's MassDOT's paying for that.
Yeah,
But that's
good.
in the current plan.
Anybody else? Caroline, do you have any, Counselor Watsonfeld, do you have any questions? You're good. Okay. Anyone else here? Any last words? Nope.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Forward to
I
seeing you.
really appreciate all the information here. This was a lot.
Look forward to talking more about the budget.
Yeah.
Yep, soon.
Yes. Yeah. I think the 31st is your big day, right? Yeah. Yes. Thank you.
Right, thank you.
Counselor Varela.
Thank you, Chair Marcelo. I'm assuming you're looking possibly for a motion.
Promotions.
Looking for a motion that this presentation be received and filed.
We can refer it to be received and filed.
Refer it to be received and filed. Thank you.
Case. So Counselor Varela moves that this be referred back to the city council and that it be received and filed, seconded by Counselor Dominguez. We have to do a vote here. All right. Counselor Watsonfeld.
Yes.
Okay. Counselor Varela.
Yes.
See if I can do this the right way. Counselor Presnowski.
Yes.
Counselor Stott. She's still here?
Yeah, I'm still here. I'm sorry. Is this a Ola item or?
This, oh, thank you. Good point. Wow, you
Okay.
saved me there. It's late. Okay, let's go back and start that again. Thanks for that. Counselor Presnowski,
Yes.
Counselor Varela,
Yes.
Counselor Cohen,
Yes.
Counselor Dominguez,
Yes.
and myself is a yes. Counselor Dominguez. Counselor Dominguez, sorry, moves to adjourn. All those in favor, all those opposed, the ayes have it. Thank you very much, everyone.